We stand in awe of Her Majesty. Elizabeth II is the Queen of our hearts. But now, as we take you on a journey back through time, we must begin at her very start. Elizabeth was born on April 21st in the year 1926, the first child of the Duke and Duchess of York, although the Duke, well, he would soon be King George VI. She was educated privately at the family home and couldn't ask for anything more. But then our nation was shaken as Germany attacked, and she served her country in the Second World War. Following those dark days of war, happier times lay ahead. She was courted and fell in love with a certain Philip Mountbatten, and in 1947 the couple were wed. And then on the 6th of February 1952 came the day when everything changed. With the death of her father, she ascended to the throne, and so began Queen Elizabeth II's reign. And the following year, the 2nd of June to be precise, we saw the coronation of our Queen. With all the pomp and ceremony, and Westminster Abbey was the setting for the scene. And now here we are, 70 years on, and Her Majesty's reign still lasts. So I'm gonna take you on a journey through the 7 decades that have passed. So we begin in that very first decade, and the 1950s was a time of great change. The great Winston Churchill, he resigned as Prime Minister, and Anthony Eden stepped up to take the reins. But meanwhile, in the world of science...
My name is Francis Crick, and whilst at Cambridge I found fame, and along with an American buddy of mine, James Watson was his name. You see, we worked together at Cambridge, and in the year 1953 we had a breakthrough in our research which transformed medical history. We discovered the structure of deoxyribonucleic acid, but we were a bit worried it was too difficult to say. So after talking it over and sharing our thoughts, we decided just to call it DNA.
For many years we had wanted to build a road system that stretched the length of land, but until the Special Road Act of 1949, well, we lacked the power to do what we planned. But in 1958 we opened the first motorway, and it seemed that our problem had been fixed. Back then it was called the Preston Bypass. But nowadays it's called the M6. And if that wasn't enough, in 1959, and thanks to the British Motoring Corporation, the Mini first landed on our streets, and it fast became a favourite of the nation. Now the music scene, that was changing too, as rock and roll arrived on our shores, with Elvis Presley, Buddy Holly, Little Richard, Jerry Lee Lewis, and so much more. And then came the swinging 60s, you know, with like peace and love and joy. And following Charles and Anne and Andrew, well, the Queen gave birth to another boy. Edward was born in 1964, and the family was now complete. And as for the rest of this far out decade, well, you could say it was pretty neat.
And what a year for inventors, creating things that weren't there yet. In 1962, people started listening to tapes following the invention of the cassette. The following year, in '63, a very exciting thing, the invention of the touch dial telephone. No more dialing with that tiresome ring. And then a breakthrough in home entertainment, because it was in 1965 that Sony released the first video recorder, so you could tape a show if you couldn't watch it live. And of course, we can't mention this decade without that summer of '66, when our national team lifted the World Cup at Wembley and gave the whole nation their kicks. Her Majesty was there to present the cup. The Jules Rimet was gleaming. Since then, of course, it's been 56 years of hurt. Oh, but it hasn't stopped us dreaming.
A supersonic moment to end this decade as Concorde took to the skies, and it flew from Toulouse to London in 1969, and many, well, they couldn't believe their eyes. And when we got operational and started to soar, we could do London to New York in 3 hours. A magnificent machine built by us and the French, with the Rolls-Royce engines providing the power.
If we're talking about the 60s, then you couldn't ask for more, because that's when we burst onto the music scene, you know, us, the Fab Four. John, Paul, George and Ringo, well, we came and took the world by storm, and people started copying our style, and these haircuts became the norm. Our first number one was Love Me Do, released in October of 1962. We had 17 top songs in that 10 years, and we got quite used to all the screams and the cheers. And before you knew it, the 70s had arrived and the nation celebrated with glee as Her Majesty reached the milestone of 25 years on the throne. It was her silver jubilee. Many gathered for parties in streets across the nation, a familiar scene as we celebrated with neighbours, families and friends. 3 cheers for Her Majesty the Queen! Oh, in 1970 we had a real treat when the royal family visited Oz. They broke with hundreds of years of tradition when they visited Sydney because Her Majesty, Prince Philip and their daughter Princess Anne, they went on a little walkabout to meet their adoring fans. Oh, they walked the streets and they stopped to talk. They shook hands with the old and the young. And since that day, well, many other royals have followed. Yeah, like a new tradition had begun. For many years, we'd had the same monetary system, which was now outdated. Hence, in 1971, decimalisation occurred and we got rid of pounds, shillings and pence. It was always complicated trying to do the sums and difficulty was often found. So to make life easier, all the new coins sat as denominations of the pound.
And the music of this decade went through another change, which for some came as quite a shock. With the spaced out lyrics and the crazy costumes. Ladies and gents, it was time for glam rock.
Next up was the 80s and an increase in our chances of connecting with people all over the world because of all the technological advances. In 85, the mobile phone was launched and it fast became a craze, and over these past 37 years it's changed our life in so many ways. And in 84, the laptop came and revolutionised our computer needs, and now wherever we are we can play online games or watch our favourite live feeds. But none of this connection would be possible if it wasn't for Tim Berners-Lee, because in 1989 he created the World Wide Web so we could search and look and see. And it was here in Britain this phenomenon began, and history changed quite a bit. Because now if you don't know the answer to a question, you can always just Google it. But the 80s started with a glorious day on the 29th of July in 1981, as Prince Charles married his Princess Diana and the royal family stood as one. Her dress was gorgeous, the train was long, and many tears were a-shedding as the nation stopped and joined the celebration of a lavish royal wedding. And the music of the 80s was something new for the ears and the eyes, because the New Romantics, well, they stormed the charts, and it's like everything was synthesized. Yeah, there was rock and there was even a little bit of rap, but this was definitely their decade, and the music they created is still around today,
It's a legacy that will not fade. And not every decade is one to remember. And for Her Majesty, the 90s was tough. 3 of her children went through divorce, and the criticism of the monarchy at times was rough. 1992 was particularly bad. It was the year she called Annus Horribilis, family breakdown, and then a fire at Windsor. But our Queen did not make a fuss. As the decade marched on, more tragedy struck as Princess Diana died. It seemed as if the whole world grieved, and our nation was mortified. But as the decade drew to a close, we looked forward as we strived, because now we stood at a moment in history. A new millennium was about to arrive. And so here we are in Y2K, and that millennium bug, well, it didn't actually bite. But celebrations happened all across the land to mark this memorable night. And Her Majesty reached another milestone. She was glorious and happy as we joined with her to mark the occasion of her Golden Jubilee. You know, the internet had opened a way for people to connect all around the world, but I wanted to create something unique, and so in 2004 my plan was unfurled. I created Facebook and became quite popular, with millions joining the club, and so began a brand new era, the social media hub. And a glorious day in 2003 as we won the Rugby World Cup, beating Australia on their home turf and then lifting that trophy up. Of course, Jonny Wilkinson was our hero, and his drop goal won the game. Oh, a great sporting moment as the nation celebrated and sang of our team's fame. This decade had some tragic lows as terrorism reared its head. Here in the UK and of course in America, with thousands of innocent people left dead. In 2001, the US was shocked by the events of 9/11. And in 2005, our nation was hit with the bombings of 7/7. And so we arrive at this last 10 years, and there have been some ups and downs, moments that have caused us great joy, but other things that have just made us frown. In the September of 2015, Her Majesty made history again as the nation commemorated her achievement of becoming the monarch with the longest reign. And what a way to start a decade, another royal wedding to celebrate, as the Queen's grandson Prince William married his Princess Kate. And following this, in 2013, Her Majesty welcomed her first great-grandson, as Prince George was born to William and Kate. A new era had begun. And who could forget 2012 and our London Olympic Games? So many athletes achieving greatness, and some becoming household names. Mo Farah, Bradley Wiggins, and Jessica Ennis-Hill, just some of the outstanding athletes that topped the bill. A golden summer of sport it was, as our Paralympians did us proud and amazed us with their show of strength, roared on by those record crowds. And so, there you have it, that is all. Sorry if it's been a bit fast, just a whistle-stop tour of the nation's history over the 7 decades that have passed. We marvel at how life has changed, so much has come and gone. And as we finish, it seems only right to hear the Queen's anthem song. Through all these changes, her faith in God has kept her strong, and she has been a constant symbol of our Great Britain. So 3 cheers for Her Majesty the Queen. Hip hip!